Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Yevamot. We are up to Perik Chet Mishnah Daled. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burcha, Israel, ben Chana bat Miriam, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, Elavim ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua, Shenemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, and Mariana Miriam Chaya bat Tamara betoch Shar Chulei Israel. Mishnayot 1 and 2 discuss some laws regarding a man who is sterile, he cannot father children due to injury. Our Mishnah addresses laws of Yibum and Chalitza for sterile men. The Torah implies that a sterile man does not perform Yibum or Chalitza, and that no Yibum or Chalitza is performed with his widow. The Torah says that a brother performs Yibum in order to preserve his brother's name by having children with the Yevamot. So a man who cannot have children does not perform Yibum, and there is no Yibum bond between him and the Yevamot. Now the Torah also says that a brother performs Yibum to keep the name of the dead man who died childless from being erased from Israel. Since the sterile man who died could never have had children, his name was automatically erased, so no Yibum is performed with his widow, and she is free to marry without Chalitza. Our Mishnah teaches, however, that this does not apply to all sterile men. Amar Rabbi Yeshua said, Shamati she'asaris choletz v'choltzin li'ishto. I heard from my teachers that a certain type of sterile man performs chalitza with his brother's widow, and his brothers perform chalitza with his wife sheli died childless. V'asaris lo choletz v'lo choltzin li'ishto. And that a different type of sterile man does not perform chalitza with his brother's widow, and his brothers do not perform chalitza with his wife. Enli lifaresh, but I have no way to explain which type needs chalitza and which does not. Now Tana offers an explanation. Amar Rabbi Akiva said, Ani afaresh, I will explain these statements. Sri Saddam, someone who was born healthy but became sterile through an injury inflicted by man. And the same is true if anything else caused him to become sterile, such as an illness or injury from an animal. Choletz v'chotzin li'ishto, he performs chalitza with his brother's wife, and his brothers perform chalitza with his wife, mipnei shayta lo shat akosher, because he had a time in his life when he was fit to have children. Since there was a time when he was able to preserve his brother's name, he has a yibum ban with the Yevamah, which he removes through chalitza. And since there was a time when his own name was not erased from Israel, his brothers perform chalitza with his wife. Sris chama, whereas someone who is sterile from birth. Now, just to explain that, actually we'll see at the end of our Mishnah that his brothers, in the case where you have a sterile man through an injury that came to him or an illness, we will see at the end of our Mishnah that his brothers can also perform Yibum with his wife. He, however, will usually not be able to perform Yibum since he has become sterile from an injury. He is forbidden to marry a Jewess of proper lineage, like we learned in Mishnah 2. If the Yevamah happens to be a convert, though, he is allowed to marry her. Moving on, Sris Chama, where someone who is sterile from birth, literally, Sris Chama means sterile from the sun, but meaning sterile from the moment he saw the light of the day. He has certain physical characteristics that show that he can never have children. Lo choletz v'lo chotzin li'ishto, he does not perform chalitza with his brother's wife, and his brothers do not perform chalitza with his wife. Mipnei shelo hayta lo shat kosher, because he never had a time in his life when he was fit to have children. Another Tana explains the two statements in the opposite way. Rabbi Eliezer says, Lochi, it is not so. Elisris chama, rather someone who is sterile from birth, choletz v'chotzin li'ishto, performs chalitza with his brother's wife, and his brothers perform chalitza with his wife, because he can usually be healed and does not need to stay sterile forever. Since he can be healed and would then be able to preserve his brother's name, he can perform chalitza, and since his name would not have to have had to be erased from Israel, his brothers can perform chalitza, and he and his brothers may also perform yibum. Slisadam, whereas someone who is sterile through an injury inflicted by man, lo choletz v'lo chotzin li'ishto, does not perform chalitza with his brother's wife, and his brothers do not perform chalitza with his wife, because he cannot be healed and will stay sterile forever. Another Tana cites a proof to Rabbi Akiva. He'id Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera al ben Megusat she'ayta b'Yerushalayim Sris Adam. Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera testified about a man named Ben Megusas who was in Yerushalayim and was sterile through an injury inflicted by man, v'muet ishto, and when Ben Megusas died, the sages permitted his brother to perform Yibum with his wife. Likem divrei Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera gave this testimony to support the words of Rabbi Akiva, who ruled that the brothers perform chalitza with the wife of a man who became sterile through injury, and they may similarly perform Yibum with her. And the Rav does tell us, V'alacha ki Rabbi Akiva, the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Shomer, who says, Sris Adam choletz v'chotzin lishto, that a man who became sterile through injury or illness, but not from birth, they perform chalitza to his wife. Choletz, he gives chalitza to the Yevamah. Chotzin lishto, they give chalitza to his wife if he dies. Miyabim lishto, they can perform yibum to his wife. Aval hu eno miyabim, but he cannot perform yibum to his brother's wife. Sherei pasul avo bakal, because like we said, he cannot marry a Jewess of kosher lineage, unless, like we said, she was a convert. And that is in the Mishnah Daled. Mishnah now continues discussing laws of Yibum and Chalitza for people who cannot have children. Hasaris lo choletz v'lo miyabem, one who is sterile from birth does not perform Chalitza or Yibum, as Rabbi Akiva taught in the previous Mishnah. V'chen ailonit lo choletz v'lo mitabemed, and so too an ailonit, a woman who can never have children, meaning she has certain physical characteristics that show that she can never have children. Lo choletz v'lo mitabemed, she also does not perform chalitza and is not taken in yibum if her husband dies without children. Since the Torah describes what happens when the widow gives birth after yibum, it implies that only a woman who can have children needs yibum or chalitza, as the Gemara says on page 12a in Masechet Yevamot. The Mishnah discusses what happens if these people do perform chalitza or yibum. If one who is sterile from birth performs chalitza with his yevamah lo fisala, he does not disqualify her from marrying a kohen. Although women who receive chalitza is usually forbidden to marry a kohen, like we saw earlier in chapter 1 Mishnah 4, rabbinic prohibition, this chalitza is meaningless since there is no yibum ban between the sterile man and the yevamah. Be'alah, but if he cohabits with her pisala, he does disqualify her from marrying a kohen because it is a forbidden act of cohabitation. It's forbidden to cohabit with a brother's wife when there is no mitzvah yibum with her, and a woman who engaged in a forbidden act of cohabitation is forbidden to a kohen. She has the same status of a zonah that we spoke about earlier in chapter 6 Mishnah 5. So too if there is an ailonit with whom the brothers perform chalitza, lo fisalua, they do not disqualify her from marrying a kohen. The chalitza is meaningless since there is no yibum ban between them. Be'alua, but if they cohabit with her, pisalua, they do disqualify her because the cohabitation with her is a forbidden cohabitation since there was no mitzvah yibum with her. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.